Continuing on with chapter 14, turn the page to 420. All right, we're going to do a lab on LD50, but make sure that you know what this means. So LD50 means lethal dose 50% dead. And LD50 is just a standard of toxicity that we use for all kinds of substances. We know the LD50 to rats, we test rats a lot in toxicology. We know how much caffeine it will take to kill a rat. We know how much arsenic, how much Lysol, how much bleach, etc. We know how much it takes to kill 50% of a rat population. And we call this LD50, lethal dose 50% dead. The higher the LD50, it means low toxicity, and vice versa. Because if you've got a high number that it takes to kill rats, it means it's not that toxic. It takes a lot of it to kill something. Whereas if you've got a low LD50 number, it means it takes very low amount to kill 50% of a population. Make sure you know what the word dose response curve, and this right here, this right here is a dose response curve. So this is a type of dose here where immediately you start to have deaths. So whenever a population is exposed to some toxin, immediately you're going to start to see deaths. And it's going to rise and rise and rise and rise until 100% of this population is dead. So to find out your LD50 number is you draw a dotted line here, it hits the line and you drop it down, and this is the dose that kills 50% of the population. This one here has a threshold number, and what that means is that this population can tolerate and not die from a low amount of a toxin. And eventually you hit a point where now you're going to start hitting deaths. The higher the dose, the more the deaths. And so this point where you start to have a die-off is called your threshold. And this line is called your linear dose response curve. Not this part, but this part is the linear dose response curve. So this graph does not have a threshold, but this one does. This one, deaths start immediately with any kind of dose. Here, you have some sort of tolerance, then you hit a threshold, and now you start to have deaths. And so you can draw a line from the 50 down here, and then you'd have your dose here. That's an LD50 dose. And it makes more sense, study your lab when you're studying for your test to understand this a little better. So here is your couple of terms you need to know. Dose response curve. ED50 is an estimated dose, not the lethal dose. The threshold dose. And we test toxins on rats, and then we extrapolate the results to human weight. So we know what the dose is that's going to kill a human, not because we've tested it on humans, but because we say, well, a rat weighs this much. If we multiply the rat's weight by a human weight, we can figure it out for humans, kind of. It's not foolproof. I mean, we're not rats. Rats, their physiology, their anatomy is different than ours, and it's not a perfect thing, but it's the best we do because, again, we're not going to test on humans. All right, page 421, here's some more terms. Make sure you know acute versus a chronic exposure and what synergistic effects are. So acute means you get a high dose of lead, you're dead. Chronic means you get low doses of lead over long periods of time and eventually it kills you. Synergistic means two different toxins that seem safe by themselves, but together they can become toxic. All right, now we're on page 423. We have the risks of dying from certain kinds of activities. The most riskiest activity that people can undertake is smoking, and that's the highest risk of dying. Then heart disease, then cancer, then being overweight, automobile accidents, etc. A lot of people are scared of things like dying in an airplane accident when they're much more likely to die from heart disease. Know these terms: risk assessment, risk management. The CDC is the Centers for Disease Control. The FDA is the Food and Drug Administration. The EPA is the Environmental Protection Agency. So the EPA has an acceptable risk. They will allow a chemical to be used if the risk is 1 in a million that somebody will die from it. So that is considered their acceptable risk. The next page, page 425, we have different approaches to chemicals and toxins in the environment. This first chart is how the United States operates. We have initial research and development for a couple of products, and they go on the shelf, and they found out that some of them cause human health, and so they recall that one. In Europe, they have better protections for consumers. They have better laws that protect consumers. Here they have to go through extensive, rigorous testing, and only the safest ones will be allowed on the market. So Europe has better laws that protect consumers than we do. So make sure you know this chart and this caption for your next test. Page 426, we have a lot to know. First thing, you need to know this law, FIFRA, the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act. You just need to know FIFRA. You don't have to memorize all of this part. Just know FIFRA. And it first began as a consumer protection law so that when you bought a pesticide, it was guaranteed to kill pests. The law has now evolved to regulate pesticides for safety. So initially it was like, hey, if you bought this rat killer, it's going to kill rats. It was a consumer protection law. Now it makes sure that the rat killer isn't going to kill you. And the EPA administers FIFRA. Another agency you need to know, this is an agency, OSHA. It is a government organization that regulates workplace safety. And there's laws that OSHA has on how to protect workers. And every place of work has to post OSHA laws, including all the schools. So in the Saugus High break room, there's a big poster of OSHA laws and rights. And at all the other schools too as well. Okay, this is another law, the Toxic Substances Control Act. You just need to know it as TSCA. The law requires that the Environmental Protection Agency monitors industrial chemicals. So make sure you know that this law is for industrial chemicals, not all chemicals. All right, next page. The last page. Page 428 has a big chart of the dirty dozen that were banned by the Stockholm Convention as being particularly terrible. Now, a lot of these are now currently banned, but they've stuck around, and a lot of them are at the North Pole. They're POPs, persistent organic pollutants. And even though we've banned them, it's going to take decades, maybe centuries, for them to break down completely. So the dirty dozen that were banned, the 3 ones you really need to know that will be maybe asked on the AP test are PCBs, dioxins, and DDTs. We'll talk about them more on the toxin chart that you will fill out. Make sure you know the Stockholm Convention is for the dirty dozen, which are the chemicals that were banned. And that's it for Chapter 14.